Last week, pollution warnings were in place in nearly 50 beaches in England after heavy rainfall meant untreated sewage was being pumped into the sea.
The government's now published a plan to clean up England's sewage system, promising the strictest targets ever on water companies. Our Environment and Rural Affairs correspondent Claire Marshall explains.
Over the past week, people have been warned to stay away from dozens of beaches across England and Wales because of untreated sewage pouring into rivers and the sea. Hazardous for beachgoers and deadly for animals. These pictures are from a river near Swindon. Pollution from a Thames water pumping station killed at least 1,000 fish and countless smaller creatures. Almost all life on this stretch of river just wiped out. Against this backdrop, the government has published its plan to clean up the sewage system. It claims that the water companies will now face the strictest ever pollution targets. It says billions of pounds must be invested on improving infrastructure, but it will be part funded by an increase in water bills.
And then between 2025 and 2030, the average annual rise in water bills will be about £12. And that in the context of other pressures on household incomes is, I think, modest, and I think a price that most people would be willing to pay to tackle this problem of sewage overflows in our river system.
Even with more money, it could take years to make a difference. This is Croyd Beach in North Devon. The water's safe today, but there are regular storm discharges after wet weather. Justin Dyson lives here. He's a surfer and he's had enough.
You feel completely helpless. I'm one of these boring people. I've written to my MP a couple of times. You get a different answer, but it's just weaselly words. Nothing gets done. And meanwhile, when you get heavy rainfall, guess what? They pump raw sewage into the sea again.
Many visitors feel the same way.
It's pretty disgusting, but I think it's just an indication of this country and how they've let big corporations get away with minimum input and maximum profit for a good few years now, and unfortunately everything's just coming home to roost. I think it's an indication of a bigger problem.
Disgusting. I really don't like the fact that it's happening. Before we came away, I did check the surface against sewage map because I was really concerned about swimming in the sea with the sewage, but it seemed this particular part of Devon was okay. But yeah, I would not go in the sea where there's sewage, definitely not.
We can speak up in numbers, but at the end of the day, money talks, I think. So yeah, if it's cheaper and easier for them to dump it in the ocean, then that's what they're going to do.
The school holidays are nearly over and soon the tourists will go home. But it doesn't seem that the public fury over this issue is going to disappear. And today's plan is unlikely to satisfy many. The target just to improve the amount of sewage released on popular beaches like this is 13 years from now. Claire Marshall, BBC News, North Devon.
Let's talk to environmental campaigner Fergal Sharkey. Fergal, morning to you. Good to have you back on the programme. We've spoken before. I know what you think at the moment about it just not being good enough.
It's not only is it not good enough, I'm afraid government have actually created an even bigger shambles than existed before. When I woke up yesterday morning, dumping sewage into rivers and onto beaches was illegal outside of exceptional circumstances. By yesterday afternoon, government have now legalised water companies to dump sewage in our rivers and on our beaches for at least the next 28 years. It is, I'm afraid, probably the greatest act of violence.
Sorry, Fergal, I'm going to have to interrupt you there. Is that fact or is that your interpretation?
No, that is fact. If you actually look at what government are doing, they have now put a system in place where government or water companies can continue to now dump in sewage for the next 28 years until 2050 is actually the maximum outline and deadline they've provided. It is, I'm sorry to say, probably the greatest act of violence against the environment I personally will ever witness in my lifetime. I think the government have totally misread the public mood in all of this, the anger, the frustration, and I'm afraid their actions are now just going to fuel that anger even further.
I should say the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, has said that between now and 2025, water companies will be investing £3 billion in order to reduce the use of storm overflows. Storm overflows have always been there as an emergency release valve when you get extreme rainfall events, but they are starting in some cases to be used far too often. And he also said it was regrettable that the issue hadn't been addressed over the last 40 to 50 years. between now and 2025, that investment, how will we see that investment, Fergal Sharkey?
Well, here's the thing. What the actual deadline, if you look further at the statement, Anaga, the actual end deadline is 2050. So that's 28 years from where we are today. The date you referred to is, if you like, stage one.
Yeah.
I'll repeat what I said. Yesterday morning when I woke up, dumping sewage into our rivers was illegal, as adjudicated by the European Court of Justice in 2012. Government have known that all along. What government have done is not act to protect the environment, but actually acted to protect the water companies. I think it's appalling that George Eustice is now suggesting that we are going to see an increase in our bills off what have already told the water companies and made it public. In the regulator's opinion, water companies have had all of the funding they needed for the last 30 years to fix this issue. We've given them the money, we've already paid for this, and now the Secretary of State is rubbing salt into a very sore wound, telling us that we're going to have to pay for it even again for a second time. It's outrageous.
There are enforcement cases being pursued against South West Water, Anglian Water, Northumbrian Water, Thames Water, Wessex Water and Yorkshire Water. So these enforcement cases surely show that this isn't being accepted. I know it's happening, but it's not acceptable.
And I would draw your viewers' attention to the fact that that enforcement inquiry came about simply because of the result of work done by amateurs, by part-time people like the Windrush Against Sewage campaign, like Professor Hammond, who had to drag the regulators and DEFRA into the recognition that what was going on was far bigger than they'd ever anticipated. I'm afraid government have now simply sold our rivers down to the water companies. They've given water companies a get out of jail card free. And might I remind everyone, water companies have made off with £72 billion of our money in dividends. Chief executives being paid millions of pounds, multiples of millions of pounds in salaries. And I'm afraid George Eustice's handle of this has been catastrophic, and he really should consider his position.
Well, in the absence of him doing that, or telling us he's doing that, what practically can be done right now to improve the situation?
George Eustice and the regulators have always had the power, and they've had the power for 30 years to fix this with nothing more than the stroke of a pen. Today, they can issue enforcement orders, tell the water companies, we've given you the money, you've got 12 months to resolve this issue, you're making the investment, the public's paid for this, and if you don't do it, that power gives them the ability to fine water companies up to 10% of their annual turnover. And what's actually happened, we've let the water companies off the hook for the next 28 years, and we're going to have to pay for them profiteering and them exploiting and polluting for profit. That simply is not good enough.
Fergal Sharkey, water quality campaigner. Thank you very much for talking to us on Breakfast. I should say the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, did say in a statement, this is the first government to take action to end the environmental damage caused by sewage spills. We will require water companies to protect everyone who uses our water for recreation and ensure storm overflows pose no threat to the environment. Water companies will need to invest to stop unacceptable sewage spills so our rivers and coastlines can have greater protection than ever before.
Let's see, time is 9:45. Holly, what have you got?
Good morning.